Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to Frontline Access from Maccabi Canada. My name is Daniel Smadjevitz, and I'd like to bring in my co-host, the only figure skating gold medalist in Maccabi Games history, Dylan Moskovich.
Thanks, Daniel. I didn't compete at the Maccabi Games, but I guess technically that makes me undefeated at the Maccabi Games.
Don't ruin the fun. So before we bring in our guest for this evening, I want to thank once again producer Jared Goldberg and the JCC. So now, without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Shi Davidi. Shi is the ultimate Blue Jays insider. He joined Sportsnet in 2011 as an MLB Insider and columnist for sportsnet.ca, and he brings baseball fans across Toronto a look into the clubhouse from around the major leagues as well as in the Blue Jays. He is also the author of the 2016 book, The Big 50, the Toronto Blue Jays look at the men and moments that have made the Blue Jays history. The book relives everything from the backroom dealing that brought MLB to Toronto and Jose Bautista's unforgettable bat flip, which we'll get to soon. Shi, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me. How are you guys doing today?
Great. How are you?
Great.
All right.
My apologies for butchering the title of your book.
All good. All good.
So first off, how are you and your family doing?
We're doing all right. It's like everybody, it's perennial Groundhog Day. I've got two boys, 12 and 10, and they're going stir crazy here and there. But we try to get out, play a little bit of sports, interact with people at a safe, social, physically distanced pace as much as we can, and living our lives, waiting for some of this some normalcy to return.
So speaking of normalcy, before we actually get into Blue Jays talk, we keep hearing about different return to play scenarios. The latest one that came out was a 50-game season. Talk of that. What are your thoughts? What do you know? What can you tell us?
Well, all these things right now are still under negotiation between the Major League Baseball owners and the Players Association, and there's a lot of back and forth on there. Really, this is a struggle for dollars, and I think a lot of what we're hearing right now are these maximalist positions from both sides, and I think eventually they're going to move towards each other in the middle. There's a few things that are making it a bit more complicated in that. The reality is that in the 2021 season, at least some teams, if not more than that, are going to have limitations on what kind of audiences they have in all likelihood. And that's going to create another revenue drag for the owners. And whatever's sort of agreed upon for this year will serve as a bit of a framework for what takes place next season. And then the collective bargaining agreement between players and ownership expires at the end of 2021 season. And so both sides are very reluctant to establish anything right now that could impact the talks down the road. So it's a bit of a complicated mix. They have a bit more to resolve than some of the other leagues who are mostly just worried about the health aspect. I think the health aspect is by and large relatively settled in baseball, and really this is just about the money at this point.
So speaking about the money, Blake Snell came out a few weeks ago, and he said it was just not worth it financially to play a shortened season. Is he the exception, or is he the rule amongst players?
I don't think he's. I think he's neither. I mean, I think he was speaking emotionally, and I think that some of his comments were taken out of context. But at that point in time, players were upset, and they continue to be upset, and understandably so. Where essentially their employer is saying, hey, look, that agreement we made with you guys on what your salaries would look like in the event there's a season back in March, that's no good anymore. And we want to take more money from you. And we're not giving you hazard pay the way some companies are giving their employees hazard pay for working amid the coronavirus pandemic. So that's where that was coming from. I think by and large, the players want to play. They understand that there is no normalcy. There's nothing that's risk-free. I mean, going to the grocery store right now isn't risk-free. So certainly working in any environment can never be risk-free. And I think they're willing to accept that. The issue is that, they don't want their salaries rolled back. They don't think that they should be. And, if you're an employee in any field, whether you have the good fortune to be a professional athlete or you're working in any other industry that's enduring hardship right now, you understandably don't want your salaries rolled back.
Coming from an amateur sport, which is kind of a different world, and living with a professional tennis player, I kind of have a bit of a view on both sides of the fence. With amateur sports, really a lot of the athletes, especially in figure skating, they get by. They want to know that the funding's there enough that they can pay their bills and they can do what they do. Do you find there's a bit of a divide in baseball with regards to the prioritizing of the salary versus getting to play the game? Or do you find it's weighed heavily one way or the other?
Well, I think there's two things, right? When you get to the big league level, you've made it. You're in the top 1% of your field. And there's a lot of money in that industry. There's a ton of money, and you are the product. As a player, you are the product that they're selling. Nobody's coming to the ballpark just for the stadium, or because the management team is super interesting, or because the ownership is benevolent. They're coming for the players. So you're the product, and if the product is generating X amount of revenue, you're going to want your share, and I think that's important. But a lot of this is also rooted in the history of the game, where for decades, owners completely manipulated players and grossly underpaid them, took advantage of them. And eventually the players were able to unionize. They got smarter. They became more educated about not only what other players were being paid, but also what kind of numbers they were generating in terms of revenue. And understandably, they fought for their share. So I think that every conflict over money in baseball is rooted in that history and is tied to that the amount of conflict that they've had over the years. And they're wary about it. So, as a player, owners have consistently tried to roll back player rights over the years since the union, since players unionized. And I think everything's looked through that prism. So you're right. It's a vastly different world than the amateur world. Unfortunately, our amateur athletes who have the same level of dedication, have the same level of talent and ability. They aren't able to share in a revenue pie that's as big as the one that the professional baseball players have. But I think because of that history, they guard whatever it is that they're able to get from that pool very, very closely.
Fair enough.
So touching again on revenue, some teams or even players, David Price and the Dodgers, for example, have committed to paying their minor leaguers. Some have not, of course. We had Ty Kelly on a few weeks ago, and Ty is a staunch advocate for the rights of minor leaguers. Are these players getting lost in the shuffle?
Absolutely. I mean, they've been lost in the shuffle for years, and the way that some of these guys are paid, and the way that the conditions that they have to work in, they're completely being exploited very badly in certain cases, and I think this is an issue that teams have become, or the public has become aware of. Some teams have made strides, the Blue Jays being one of them, to raise salaries. There's still a long way to go, but just to give them a livable wage, something that's in certain cases even close to a minimum wage, that'd be a great step forward. But the minor league players have very few rights. A lot of them are treated as if they're lucky to be in professional baseball, but for the most part, those players have to take it on their way up the ladder. And unless you're, a first round pick or someone who's got some money invested in them, you make too much noise, you get bounced pretty quick. So, the minor leaguers, they face a lot of hardship. They do it because it's a glamour industry and they get to be part of chasing a dream. And sometimes people who chase dreams get taken advantage of.
Do you find there's a solidarity amongst the players, like the guys in the, playing in the major leagues who have made the show and are there? Is there some sort of like a protective feeling, like a big brother kind of looking out for the minor league baseball players? I know in tennis, there's a fund going on right now that a lot of the top players are pulling together, matched with the tournaments and the ATP and the WTA to help some of these players. I don't really know if that's something that's valid in this type of a situation. But do you find that the players look out for each other with that regard?
There have been cases where they have, but right now to say that like the entire major league grouping is worried about what's happening in the minor leagues, that's not true. But there are individual cases where somebody's helping out some people that they know, or they're housing some of the people that bringing in some of the people into their circles and taking care of them in that regard. So there's sort of these little micro cases where you're getting that. But in terms of some grand plan, that's not really there. And, to be honest, right now, the Major League Baseball players, they're facing a significant fight against ownership. And, they're facing a challenge in terms of maintaining solidarity amongst themselves and not fracturing and, uniting behind Tony Clark's leadership, which has been at times challenged by segments of the player base. So, I think one of the strategies that the owners may be using right now is trying to foment a little dissent amongst the groups of players at the big league level, looking down the road to the 2021 collective bargaining agreement talks. So there are a number of issues around that, and I think that's why they're sort of kind of taking care of their own business, and individuals who have a bit more of a generous spirit are making acts of individual kindness, sort of the way David Price did.
So, speaking a lot about minor leaguers, now let's talk about some major leaguers, and starting with the future of the Toronto Blue Jays. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, and Kevin Biggio. Talk to me about the future of the team, the trio of these second-generation stars. What does it look like?
It looks really interesting. And, I think that it's Nate Pearson. If there's a season right now, he's going to start the season. He's going to have to start the season with the Blue Jays. And that's going to make them really interesting. And he's the, potential front of the rotation starter that of the future that they really need. And, you look at the young pieces, it reminds me a little bit of where they were sort of in the late 90s, where you had this group of coming up: Carlos Delgado, Sean Green, Alex Gonzalez, Shannon Stewart. There was Chris Carpenter, Roy Halladay, Kelvin Escobar. You had this big group of talented youngsters, and the players that you mentioned and a handful of others. Danny Jansen comes to mind. They've got this budding core. And the issue in the early 90s and late 90s, early 2000s was that they just weren't able to supplement that group, and they just never had the depth to support them sufficiently. And that's why the playoff drought extended as long as it did. And, right now the Blue Jays have this intriguing core, and will they be able to build sufficiently around it? They've got a nice foundation, but now they've got to frame up the house and put in the drywall and, dress it up just the right way to make sure that it becomes a successful building. And so this is going to be a really important year. And, depending on how long the season is, if you're in and around 80 games, you can get some small sample size weirdness, and, you get guys hot for a shorter part of the year. The Blue Jays have a lot of talent. They have the important naivety of youth, where they don't see why they can't do things. And you put that together, maybe they can make a little bit of noise and surprise some people.
That naivety you talk about with youthful athletes, that invincibility of not really having that long-term experience that makes you start to second guess yourself, which does happen. I can attest to that. What do you think these players are doing right now to manage this time? Because now they are having the time to sit and think, and maybe it's going to be the type of situation that makes their brain start wandering as if they were, in the game longer, and they've been through a lot more things, and they have that time to sit and think and question. How are these players staying sharp? How are these players, trying to push off a lack of momentum or a lack of building individually or even as a team? Like, do you know what the coaches are doing, or how these players are staying connected and motivating each other?
Yeah, it's sort of a different across the board, Dylan. And, different players, a lot of it depends on sort of what your situation is, right? So Bo Bichette, we'll take him for an example. He brought in 2 minor league players who are living with him, Santiago Espinal and Forrest Wall, and they're at the Bichette family home. And his father, Dante, was a former All-Star outfielder. They've got a private gym. They've got a half field. They've got batting cages. They've got great facilities. They have workouts every day. Their trainer that they work with comes by, works them out 5 times a week. They've got a perfect setup, so they're doing what they would do in a typical off season, just waiting for the word go. Other players, if they don't have as much access, for a period of time, Jordan Romano, he was living on his own in Dunedin, and he was throwing a ball against a brick wall because that's what he had to work with. Now that there've been some easing of restrictions, and he's back at the Blue Jays facility there working out on his own there, so he's got a more proper structure. But a lot of it is completely dependent on where you are and what you have available to you. So you've got a pretty big variance in terms of where players are at right now. But just from a coaching and wider team perspective, the coaches are getting on Zoom calls regularly with players, talking about different plans, trying to ensure that when they get the word go, they can hit the ground running and just sort of take off from where they were as best they can. And, the players have had a couple Zoom calls on their own where they're just hanging out and trying to be friends like they would be during the regular season. So, a lot of this, there's no ideal, right? It's just sort of making the best of whatever your situation is. And that's pretty much what everybody's doing, just trying to find whatever it is that they can do and do what they can with what's available to them.
So these guys, the Jays, they're always playing in the toughest division in baseball. You have the Yankees and the Red Sox who are spending like it's nobody's, and then you have the Rays that are perennial contenders every year. How do the Jays compete with these teams?
Well, it's not, money's a part of it, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. You have money to work with, like you can get the best players, and the Blue Jays went out this offseason and got one of the best free agent pitchers on the market in Hyunjin Ryu. And that's the kind of move that they should be making, given where they are and given the market that they play in. But it's also about just being smart in terms of how you develop your people, making sure that you're making the most of your opportunities in the draft and international free agency, and building a sound organization so that you have a good base of talent in the minor leagues and that you have that support and that depth that, I was mentioning earlier that the Blue Jays haven't had in the past to help sustain what it is that you build. Because look, as much as we like all the young players that are currently on the Blue Jays roster, the reality is that there's going to be a brutal rate of attrition, that some of them are going to fail. Some of them are going to get injured. Some of them are just going to peter off. That's just the way it is, because not everybody reaches their potential, unfortunately. Amazing for the Blue Jays if all of them do, but the likelihood is that won't happen. So you need to have all the other things in and around that. And that's what's great about the Rays. I mean, you look at them, you'd be hard pressed to find a better run organization. Them, the Oakland A's, they continually lose talent because they can't afford to keep it. And they just are able to supplement from within their system. They're opportunistic. They make good deals. They're able to develop people. They're able to take guys that other teams have discarded and help them fix themselves or make a development, make some sort of change that allows them to experience better success. That's really the model for a lot of teams, and some of the richer market teams. The Yankees have been very good at this. The Blue Jays are trying to get there as well. They're trying to take a lot of what those small market teams have done, and then just throw a lot more resources at it and really shoot forward. I mean, the Dodgers might be the prime example of that.
On a winning team, you talk about making these young players hit their full potential. Where does this come from? Like this team culture, the kind of the standard, the fostering of this environment that makes these people thrive. Where do you think that comes from on the team, and what makes these teams stand out and have that versus the teams who maybe have the talent and it just kind of doesn't really get there?
That's a great question, and it's something that I've kicked around a lot over the years, and my opinion on it sort of changed a little bit. I used to put sort of no stock in it whatsoever. I'm like, if you're talented, you're going to get there. And I think like covering the game for as long as I've had, I've seen talent, and it's not always the talent that gets there. It's the culture, the understanding, the motivation, the drive, and it's not always a bunch of guys having to be friends, but just just having a shared purpose and a shared common goal, and that you can be professional together when you need to be professional. You can hold each other accountable, and so to me, that always starts with your players. And people always like to say, "Oh, the coaching staff is this, and the front office is this," but it's got to be your players, right? It can't be top down from management ranks and the coaching ranks. What their job is sort of to facilitate the environment, but ultimately it's your players who have got to do it. Like, you've got to have the right people who are about it for the right reasons, right? It's not just, hey, I'm here to make myself a ton of money. It's here, I'm here to make myself a ton of money, but also to dominate, and I want to be the best. And the money, if I take care of my business, then the money will come. Not, I'm worried about the money and then I'll take care of my business. So I think that's sort of what you need. And I think the Blue Jays have a really interesting group. I think Bo Bichette is obscenely driven. Vladimir Guerrero is ridiculously driven. Kevin Biggio has that right sort of mentality is not the right word, but just that attitude that is just, hey guys, no BS, let's go, let's do this. That brings that element to the group, and that personality, a steely resolve that I think is going to help them. Danny Jansen is about that too. So they've got some really nice pieces there. In terms of a older veteran leadership standpoint, Matt Shoemaker has been a very good presence for them. They've got Travis Shaw, who's been around a little bit and is going to have to take on a bit more responsibility, but he's a guy who brings a lot of life experience to the table. Ken Giles, who came here with a bit of a tattered reputation, has proven to be somebody who is selfless and giving of himself to others. So, it's certainly an interesting environment that they have to work with, and we'll see if they get the right mix. It's like if there was a formula to it, then everybody would be able to do it, right? But I've been a part of, I think it's the same thing in any work environment. I've been in offices where, you get a lot of people who piss and moan and complain. And, that attitude is demotivating for a group, even if it's just a small segment of the group. But, you have a group where the strongest personalities are, let's go out there and kick some butt. Then I think that's going to impact the group in a positive fashion.
Yeah, toxic. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I agree. A toxic. I'm going to finish my thought. A toxic energy will make a team disease ridden. And also just one thing I wanted to touch on is the talent aspect you talked about. When someone has talent, they're going to get there. I always, through my career, I said, you can have a Ferrari, but you need a driver behind the wheel. And you can have all the natural talent and all the goods, but if you don't have the right environment to foster that talent, if you don't have the right mindset, you don't have the right building blocks across the board in the mind and in the body, then it's not going to happen. Then there's also luck with injuries and timing and all of that. But it's through my experience in sport that talent bit is a very up in the air component of what deems a career that becomes successful or not.
Right. And like, it's, you can't just be like the perfect makeup guy and have no talent, right? There has to be some talent there. But what I've experienced, and, I teach a couple of journalism courses at Centennial College. And what I say to my students every year is that, I don't care how talented you are if you don't work, right? I will take the less talented person who works at 110% versus the uber talented person who works at 50%. Every time. I want you need that motivation, that drive. And I think that's where that's where you get the difference. And when you get the right combination of, desire, motivation, work ethic, and talent, I mean, that's when you get Mike Trout, right? But if you don't have enough of the motivation, you're not going to get there. And if you don't have enough of the talent, you're not going to get there. So, I mean, team building is super tricky. But I think it's the same. Like, there's so many parallels between, a sporting environment, a sporting clubhouse, to everyday life, right? I mean, to me, and maybe I'm just too romantic about it or whatever, but I see a lot of mirrors to life in sports, in the way that the athletes have to go about things, the environment, what it creates. And, if you don't have the right people, it's just not going to work. And no matter how talented you are, you've got to want to get there. You've got to have a shared purpose and a common goal. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what the ability is, because the ability is just never going to be leveraged.
So I'd like to know, who's that one guy in the clubhouse that everyone turns to, the glue that keeps everyone together?
Oof. So, I mean, this group has been in transition. They were just starting to really establish that. I mean, you looked at it last year, and Justin Smoke was sort of like, the big grandfather figure. Maybe that's not the best way to put it. Father figure to everybody. The guy who'd been around, the guy who could float through different groups, the guy who everybody respected. Freddie Galvis, for the time that he was here, was similar in that role. I think for this group, that was really still being established. I think once a lot of the veteran players were traded at the middle of last season, the trade deadline last year, I mean, the keys were really handed over to the kids, right? And I mean, Bo is kind of the flashier player, the big talent with the flair on the field, and Vladdy's the goofy guy with the smiles who hits the ball 500 feet. And Kevin Biggio and Danny Jansen, to me, are sort of like have the potential to become the sort of the backbone players of the team, the guys who are holding it together, but they're still early in their careers. I mean, Danny Jansen's got a year and change in the big leagues. Kevin Biggio's got 3 or 4 months. It's a lot to put on them at this point. So I think for this group, that all that is still developing, and it's going to be really intriguing to see how it plays out.
So we just saw a question on the screen from Brian Levy. Who's your sleeper in the clubhouse?
Who is the biggest sleeper?
Biggest sleep.
I know a lot of people are still sort of down on Teoscar Hernandez. I'm super intrigued by Teoscar, and I know that he can be a little bit frustrating, and the ability is great, and he's had these spurts, but then he's sort of been all or nothing. But I think there's so much there, and when you got a guy who's motivated and wants to work, I like giving guys like that a lot of rope and a lot of runway, because you can tell that he's talented, and he's got some things to figure out, but he's driven to figure them out, and those are the guys I think should get more latitude, as opposed to the guys who they're talented, but you just don't see that push. And I think he can be an interesting part of this team, because if he figures out, I mean, that's serious pop. With great speed. There's some questions about his defense that have been, on display for the past few years. But he can be a dynamic offensive performer if he's able to figure out a few things. So I think he's got a chance to be a sleeper for this team.
Another question from Daniel Bernberg. Why do you think the Jewish MLB players, past or present, aren't jumping at the chance to play for Team Israel at the Tokyo Games?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, for players in the past, I think that we saw quite a few of them, like Danny Valencia ended up joining the team at the last qualifying tournament, and it helped them get there. Ty Kelly, who's been there, Josh Zaid. I mean, there've been a number of former major leaguers who play there. Guys who are currently there, I mean, they've been restricted by the rules in terms of who can participate. If you're on a 40-man roster, or I think they had access to guys in affiliated ball, but not anybody on a 40-man roster. You simply couldn't go. And so now that he's retired, maybe someone like Ian Kinsler ends up joining in 2021, should the Olympics take place the next year. That's certainly possible. But if you're in the major leagues, you're not eligible to play if you're on a 40-man roster. Up until now, you weren't eligible to play either.
So Kinsler actually, I believe, is on the team. Peter Kurtz told us about that a couple weeks ago. So another one in Team Israel's books. Yeah. Let's take a step back. Let's go, as a Blue Jays historian, we'll start with, Jared, you can begin the clip now with the bat flip.
What a wild game this was.
So you started talking about the game a little bit to us behind the scenes. It was an incredible 7th inning. You've seen this clip a bunch of times. What are your thoughts? Take us through this. Take us through the atmosphere at the stadium at the time, everything.
Well, I can tell you that. So my memories of this inning live and in person. So I remember when the top of the 7th inning, when Russell Martin threw the ball off the base of Shin-Soo Choo's bat and Rougned Odor scampered home, it was like, what is the rule on this? And then myself and my colleague Arden Zwelling at Sportsnet, we were just going through the rule book, trying to figure it out. And in the meantime, I was just communicating with a few people I know in the Blue Jays front office, just like, what are you doing on this? What do you have on the rule and things like that? So we're going back and forth. And, we identified the rule, and we'd spent a lot of our time going on that. And then, there was also sort of when the people started throwing stuff on the field, I remember just watching and just thinking, man, this has the potential to turn into a riot. This is not good. These people this stadium cannot inject a bunch of people into the city in this state, or bad things are going to happen. And then, that inning played out. And the Texas Rangers were super mad at Jose Bautista and the Blue Jays for the way they celebrated, and they had all this stuff about Jose Bautista disrespecting the game, but they never looked in the mirror and said, hey, you know what? We made 3 errors that inning. Like, that inning should never have gotten Jose Bautista. There should not have been a base runner in that inning, the way it played out. But so there's all this tension building and building and building, and Bautista hits that ball and it completely diffuses everything. And it went from this edgy, uncomfortable, combustive sort of attitude to one of just complete and utter euphoria. And, it's like an exaggeration. People say, oh, the stadium shook, but I mean, the stadium literally did shake. I remember my laptop just not being steady, and you felt a roar. It's not just the sound. It was like there was like a physical feeling to the explosion of the emotion. And it was, I've been fortunate. Like, the 2 greatest things I've gotten to cover in person are that game and the 2010 Olympics, the gold medal goal, Sidney Crosby in overtime. And those are the 2 most fiercely contested athletic events I've ever seen in person. And both times there was just this incredible outburst of emotion. And there's a little bit different. Obviously, I think that in the gold medal game for the Olympic hockey, there was just there was euphoria, but there was also relief on the players' end, because if they had blown that game, they'd had a couple posts. Crosby had a breakaway in regulation before the Americans tied it. If Canada had lost that game, I think there would have been a lot of hell to pay in downtown Vancouver. I felt like that day that downtown Vancouver was a little bit edgy, and it's the same thing in Toronto. Like that day, there was so much relief, but there was just pent up emotion for the Blue Jays in that one. It was the first time in the playoffs in 20 some odd years. You get this insane game. And then it was just, it had been satisfied. And when Bautista hit that home run. So incredible sporting memories. And, you hope as a reporter to be able to cover events of major significance. And, I got that one is one of the most significant baseball moment for the Blue Jays franchise since Joe Carter '93.
I remember that Joe Carter home run in '93. I was 9 years old. I was dozing off, and my dad started jumping around, and I woke up to it.
Yeah, I was a little bit older. I was a teenager with my friends at that time, and we were debating, should we go downtown or not? And it looked like the Jays were going to lose, and they hit the home run. We jumped in the car, zipped down Yonge Street just to join in the celebrations at the time. So, super fun memories for sure.
And here's Joe himself.
And it's actually it's fun getting to talk to Joe about that at bat. I mean, I've had a chance to speak to sort of everyone who was on the field at that time. Devon White, Paul Molitor, Joe himself, and it's amazing. Like, we take these things for granted, or we don't think about it, but all these guys think the game at such a high level. And, Paul Molitor, who had singled to put the two runners on for Joe Carter, he was at first base, and he was just making calculations about what he was expecting Mitch Williams to throw and what he was going to do on the base pass, depending on what happened if the ball was put into play. And it was fascinating too, because he came up with a man on, and he thought to himself, when he's stepping into the batter's box, if I hit a home run here, we win the World Series. This is the dream. And he'd had a terrific World Series, ended up being World Series MVP. And they said to him, hey, get that garbage out of your head. You're not a home run hitter. Stay with what you do. Do what you do. And then he delivered the single. And so it's fascinating, kind of like when you go into what the players think and how the moment can take them over and how they reel them back in. And Joe was pretty cool throughout that at bat. He wasn't thinking about, I can win the World Series. And, he got fooled on the breaking ball of the pitch before, and he was expecting Mitch Williams to throw it again. Mitch Williams ended up shaking Darren Daulton, and that got Joe thinking, oh, was he going to throw a fastball? And he's like, no, I'm going to trust that he's going to throw a breaking ball, and I'll just let my wrists do the work and adjust if he throws fastball. Mitch Williams ended up throwing the fastball, but he missed his spot with it. And because Joe Carter was thinking breaking ball, he was a little late on it, and that's why he didn't foul that ball off and ended up hitting the home run. So it's super fun to kind of get the insight into how these guys think it, and it really tells you just how elite an athlete these guys actually are.
Well, hearing you talk about the romanticism of these types of events and these types of situations that happen, and as a fan and as a spectator, like, it changes you. You remember where you were, you remember how you felt, and even rewatching it, you get the goosebumps. That all the moments leading up to that, it's like right before you die, your life flashes before your eyes as an athlete. When you have a moment like that happen, all your training and pain flashes before your eyes. It's that like cathartic, it was worth it feeling. But the only way for those moments to happen is if you're not looking at the finish line. Because, I mean, we've all seen the clips of cyclists like celebrating too early and falling, or things like that happening. As an athlete, literally, you can't take your eye off the ball in the moment. You have to process and do your job and trust that the event will happen the way it's supposed to. And on the outside, like, all these details happen, and you're talking about what these players are going through. All we see is a home run in a clinch situation, and he delivered when he needed to the most. I mean, he must have just been thinking about hitting the ball. And it's fascinating how these historical events happen, in a sense, by chance. Like, there's only so much that an athlete has in their control at any given time.
Right. I mean, like, the circumstance, just finding yourself in the circumstance is, that's the luck to a certain degree, right? Mm-hmm. You need a certain amount of fortune to be put in a good position. And then at that point, it's up to you to be ready to make the most of the opportunity once it's presented to you. And that's where, to me, a lot of people get lost, right? Because maybe you don't prepare yourself the right way, and you take a few shortcuts, and that's what comes back to bite you in the end. But to me, what I love most about the job is that I get to ask the how, right? And I'm fascinated by the how. Like, how did you do this? How were you thinking? How did you build towards that? And I think that's what baseball. And again, I'm trying not to get too romantic about it, but I think baseball, just because of the way that the game is paced, the amount of dead time building up to action, baseball really lends itself to the how and to trying to understand how things played out that way. And there are a lot of really fascinating stories. Baseball works really well with narrative, and certainly you get those big moments. I mean, in any sport, in any event, that's why we watch. That's why you want that build up. And then you're hoping to get that reward. And, for some people, you watch for years and years. I mean, think about, the Red Sox waiting a century between World Series titles. And then it finally happens. And, there's a feeling that you can't replicate. For the Blue Jays, 2015 will be special forever because of the 20 odd years between playoff appearances. And, that feeling, made a lot of people became Blue Jay fans for the first time or became re-engaged during that period. That feeling doesn't go away and it sticks with you. Just the way you said, Dylan.
I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to ruin the romantic moment here because one of the biggest stories in the offseason were the Astros Red Sox sign stealing. So tell me about that. The punishment, does it fit the crime? What are your thoughts on the scandal, on their championships? Are they tainted?
I mean, certainly they're going to be tainted. Does the punishment fit the crime? I don't know. I'm not a big strip the Astros the World Series. I think that, in the Olympics, taking away a medal makes sense because you have a clear, definitive 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Like it's not, you're not sort of destabilizing things. But with the Astros, I mean, if they don't make the World Series in 2017, do the Yankees maybe beat the Dodgers? Does another team beat the Dodgers? Does Cleveland beat the Dodgers? Does Boston beat the Dodgers? Maybe, right? So I don't think you can sort of take it away from them and crown it to the Dodgers in that way. It's just, to me, it's not clean. I think it sets a dangerous precedent. But I do think that, to me, a lot of the culpability is on Major League Baseball. This was an open secret, maybe not to the extent that the Astros were doing it, but sign stealing, the use of video to steal signs has been institutionalized on a lot of clubs, not just with Houston. Houston was just way better at it, and then they took it a step further and put it into the dugout. So the rules could have been a bit more clear. The rules could have been a bit more harsh. Penalties could have been set forward. And I think that's something that obviously baseball was working on when, the coronavirus shut everything down, but establishing a better set of rules and real guidelines and a framework for how people who engage in sign stealing or illegal electronic sign stealing are to be punished in the future. And I think the game needs that. It needs to have it clearly delineated that you do X and Y, the punishment is Z. And the game didn't have that. And the Boston Red Sox, smartwatch scandal had already happened at that point. So they knew this was in the game, and they didn't go far enough at that time. And then this ended up happening as a result.
So the sign stealing, you said, has been ingrained in baseball, especially not the digital way, but in some way, shape, or form for a long time. So there are a lot of other unwritten rules in the game. The bat flip from Bautista we just saw, it's not a written rule. You shouldn't be flipping your bat. At what point do we say we're going to accept this? We're going to accept technology as a component. We're going to allow these players to play up to the fans, especially on their home turf?
Well, I think the bat flip front, that battle is being won by the bat flippers and people who celebrate it, which is good. I think that, I don't think your joy at success necessarily needs to be taken as an insult at somebody else's failure. And that's the big problem. A lot of times just pitchers are mad. I mean, like, going back to old school baseball, pitcher give up a home run, he'd be mad about it. He hit a guy the next time up. And that was sort of like, oh, that's just the way it is. But that's stupid. That's not the way it is. It's like you want to brush a guy back to get him off the plate because you're trying to set him up for a certain pitch. Okay, that's strategy. But if you're just upset about giving up a home run, well, that's not cool. Like, you're either good enough or you're not. And if you can't handle not being good enough, you can't take it out on the guy who's showing you that you need to be better. So I think that is a culture change that's certainly happening in baseball and certainly necessary, especially when you're trying to engage a new generation of fans who love this stuff. And, I think you look at the way they do it in Korean baseball. I mean, it's part of the show. Jamie Romack, a Canadian guy who was in the Dodger system for a long time and is now one of the premier sluggers in the KBO. He's said, like, I have to do this. This is part of the show. You're not only there to deliver, you're there to be an entertainer and to put on a show for people. So have fun. That's great. In terms of technology, I know people who would love to see the game scale back its usage of technology. I mean, the technology is just everywhere, and maybe it's been a bit too much too fast, and it's in need of some more regulation. I think ultimately anything that helps you be better is great. Like I know lots of players who will religiously watch a video between at bats. They'll head up to the field and take a look at what the pitcher's doing just to get another view of it. If you think that's making you better, great, but within the rules. And I think that the technology evolved faster than the regulation of it. And I think baseball just needs to have a better regulation of it. And, I think it's made the game better. It's made the game different. I maybe not made the game better, because I know some people would be mad at me for saying that. But it's allowed players to be better in certain aspects of the game. And I think if you use it rightly or use it correctly and use it properly, there's no reason for it to not be in the game.
You kind of answered my question there, because I was going to say, if technology is making athletes better, they're going to use it. Any athletes are, you have to hold them back. They're like racehorses. They're always going to be pushing the envelope. That's their job. That's the only way they can stay in the game and try and push for the top. So to answer your point, I think it has to be clarity on baseball's part. And same with celebrations. I mean, it just has to be clear. Are you celebrating internally, or are you obnoxiously parading it in someone else's face? Personally, I thought the bat flip was an instinctual celebration of like overwhelming joy, given the tension that you were talking about. I mean, how is that an offense?
Right. In that moment, like that bat flip is a byproduct of what that game was, right? Yeah. That wasn't like, hey, Sam Dyson, I think you're a piece of crap. Look, check this out, right? It's not what that was. That was just like, we just won the series, right?
Well,
like that's
like trying to tell the fans not to scream and cheer with that excitement. Imagine hitting that home run. How are you supposed to lay your bat down like nothing happened?
Exactly.
It's absurd.
Now, I'll give you an example of where it did make much sense. And so I believe this would be 2017 in Atlanta. And the Blue Jays are getting thumped by the Braves, and Bautista is facing, what's his name? Lefty guy. I can't remember his name. Eric Flaherty, maybe? I can't remember. But they're big. The Jays are down big. Jose Bautista hits a home run, and he flips the bat, and he walks around the bases, and the Braves are pissed about it. And rightly so. It's like, that's not the time to bat flip, right? You're getting your butt handed to you. Like, you don't flip a bat. And then the next day, Julio Teheran was on the mound, and he hit Jose Bautista with the first pitch that he saw, and Bautista knew it, took it, was like, I knew that was coming. I screwed up yesterday. We move on, right? And so, I don't love the unwritten rules. I think that it can get stupid sometimes, but I do think that there is a time and place that your emotions of the game justify it. And we should not want our athletes in any realm to be robots. and any celebration should not be taken necessarily as a sign of disrespect to an opponent. You know, if you're not deliberately taunting and getting in someone's face and sort of looking at someone and you know, denigrating them with your celebration, more power to you. Go do it. Enjoy yourself. I mean, it's fun to be an athlete. It's fun to have success on the field. It's fun to be at an elite level and to perform in the moment. Like, why do we want our athletes to not enjoy that?
Well said.
Well said. So get to the question below from Howard Binstock, and I'll add to it as well. What's the league doing to speed up the game? I want to throw on top of that, I know there's the pitch clock, but there's also talk about robot or digital umpires. And when we watch the game on TV, Sportsnet, ESPN, whatever you're watching it on, you see the box. You know if it's a strike, you know if it's a ball. Does that not frustrate you, frustrate the players?
Yes, it does. All right. So first of all, what's Major League Baseball doing to speed up the game? Not enough. And I think when you're at over 3 hours for an average time, you know, that's not good. But I think the way baseball has looked at it is that they're not necessarily looking at trying to eliminate minutes off the game necessarily, but what they're trying to do is eliminate dead time, right? Which is why, you know, even though a lot of people roll their eyes at it, you know, the intentional walk is something, it's a way to just, you know, for the most part, we don't need to see a guy throw 4 pitches intentionally out of the zone, and 99.8% of the time, nothing's going to happen. And are we going to, you know, just include that in the game for the tiny percentage of times where there is a mishap? You know, things like that. Just, you know, the Major League Baseball has made strides on this, but I think they need to do more and more strictly enforce it. For me, the amount of times guys are stepping in and out of the batter's box, adjusting their batting gloves, constantly fidgeting with things, you know, that is too much. And I understand that part of it is an opportunity for the hitters to mentally reset and just gather their thoughts. But it starts getting too much where it's like every time it's like this, fidget, step back, 1 foot in, second in, 3 dip breaths, put the bat up at the, you know, that's the kind of stuff where I think they can move it along. You know, same with pitchers on the pitcher's mound. You can get the guys to move it along a little bit there. I don't love the idea of a pitch clock, because one of the beauties of baseball is that it has no clock, but maybe that's got a place in the game. If pitchers don't naturally do this, that they're going to need something to force them to move their pace along. And then in terms of, you know, robot umpires, I think that is, the technology isn't perfect. I know they experimented with it in the Atlantic League, and you know, some of the things that I've heard is that, you know, it changes the zone a little bit up and down. It's pretty good side to side. You know, it'll some pitches can still trick it. In terms of, you know, you get a pitch that breaks in a certain way, or a pitch that, you know, just cuts in at a certain angle. It's not perfect. You know, it'll still be fraught with problems, but I do think it'll give you a more consistent strike zone. I don't think that ultimately shaves time off the game, but I do know, like, look, you know, the one area where the technology has really made an impact is, you know, hitters, if they're ever not sure about a pitch, if they're mad about a pitch, they'll go into the clubhouse immediately after they're at bat and look at where that pitch was. And then the next time they'll say to the umpire, hey, you missed that one by this much. And sometimes the umpire will take it and maybe make an adjustment. Sometimes they won't. But, you know, I don't know that robot umpires are the answer yet. Like, I know a lot of people are going to be on me about this, and even some of my friends in the game. And there have been times I'm just like, let's just go with a robot umpire. I can't watch Angel Hernandez butcher the zone one more time. But I also do like some bit of human element in the game, and I think that adds something. I know that, you know, the few times where you know, a call go the wrong way and you'll be like, man, we got to fix this. But there's something to having an umpire call the play, call the zone, call balls and strikes that to me is part of the game.
What are your thoughts on something like they have in tennis with Hawkeye, where a player gets a certain amount of complaints? I don't know, not complaints, but like challenges. Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a hybrid of human and computer analysis that can be used there. Also, like tennis, I think that clock will be interesting, because if you look at players like Nadal, athletes are notorious for their superstitions and needing that control over a certain routine. And I think it's going to be interesting if that does come into play, which athletes are able to adjust to that, because that rhythm could throw off everything for certain individuals.
Yeah, and it's actually funny because last year I was talking to a coach who was actually a proponent of giving a player 2 or 3 challenges a game on certain pitches, as opposed to going the robot umpire route, and saying, you save it, and like you think a pitch is, if umpires missed one really badly, say, hey, no, look at that one. Right. And then, let the technology decide at that point. I think there's some merit to that. I think it just becomes a slippery slope, right? It's just like you let a little bit in. It's like 3 let's say, you give a guy, 3 challenges. And then, like if the umpire's having a really bad day and player needed 5, then it's like, oh, we should have 5 challenges. And then, a few minutes ago, we were talking about speeding up the game, and now you're just like, now you're grinding it to a halt even more. So, to some degree, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But with the way, if you go back and look at how games, even in the late 80s and early 90s were called, there are just some ridiculous strike calls, and players just like pick their bat and go back to the dugout and was like, that's this guy's zone today. Whereas today, like, we would have a conniption because like we've got the box up on the screen and we've got our StatCast at home and we're tracking along. Be like, well, this is why look where this ball hit. Like, this guy's brutal, and that's happening in real time. So I think that's part of the impetus now. It's just, one of the things is this: you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, we have this technology, we know what it looks like. We're evaluating the umps in real time, and what do you do? How do you resolve it? And how do you do that in a way that's sensible to the traditions of the game, the speed of the game, the pace of the game, and the way that the game the way you want the game to be played? It's pretty challenging.
So Matan wants to know if you ever foresee the game being shortened to 7 innings.
No, I think that it's been discussed this year. I don't think it picked up a lot of traction of maybe doing 7-inning double headers as part of a compressed season, like they do in the minor leagues. But I don't see 7-inning games being part of that. That's way too radical for baseball. Baseball hems and haws over the smallest of changes to something this radical. I think. Like we're still at can't get to a universal DH, and which is something that has to, this is something 2050 will probably still be debating it.
Do you ever see baseball going back to adding a day-night doubleheader in the schedule?
I can't. Especially with the way that the process of and focus and the technology in rest and recovery and preparation of athletes has evolved. Right now teams are trying to jockey for schedule adjustments based on what the latest research on sleep patterns are. That's the extent of how they're trying to sort of optimize every single element of an athlete's existence. And Dylan, I'm sure you've had experiences like this where people are telling you, like, are trying to regulate everything you do to a minute, to try and shoehorn 2 games in when you don't have to, when weather isn't forcing you to do it. I just can't see them doing that anymore.
Having those, being forced into certain things as an athlete is a very tricky thing. We're not exactly mild-minded people, I would say, athletes. So you have to be led, not pushed.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice idea, and I think that there's, from a marketing, I think if you did that, you'd have to pair it with something like a structured work week, like like Cito Gaston has long advocated for an off day every week for, whether either you're off either on a Monday or a Thursday, so you're never playing more than something like 10, 11 games in a row. And I think there's a lot of sense in that, and if you had to do a day-night doubleheader periodically to make the numbers work for something along those lines, to me, I think there could be some logic in that. But I think just the where we are right now, the way, athletes have never been more in tune with what makes their body work and how to optimize their bodies than they are these days. And they have way more tools to make it happen. I mean, teams are spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on staffers who are there to sort of milk every last bit out of the athlete in terms of maximizing every element of their day and their routine. It's something that would be so contrary to where all the trends in the game are going that I just don't see it.
So we'll get you out of here. We have a couple more questions, and we don't want to take up too much of your time. Jay wants to know, and a few others actually had questions on Mark Shapiro. So the nicest one is, do you think he catches a break this season due to the shortened schedule, given that this is a contract year?
So there's a lot of I would say conjecture about sort of whether or not he got an extension in his contract. That he's been determined to not have his contractual status announced. We found out his initial deal was 5 years upon his arrival, but there was some conjecture that it may have gotten done over last offseason, or it was going to get done at some point. So it's possible that he's already gotten an extension. In terms of whether or not he catches a break, I think that you can look at the fact that he was able to sign Hyunjin Ryu to a 4-year, $80 million contract, the richest free agent contract for a pitcher ever given in team history, as an indication of where he stands in ownership's eyes right now. I mean, if you don't trust your executive running the club, you're not authorizing a contract like that. So I think that's pretty telling about where his fate lies right now.
So we have one more question from the website. What are the odds the Expos actually come back?
This is funny. I was talking to some people about this just a few days ago, and I mean, everything has fallen apart for the Rays recently. The stadium initiatives in Tampa have gone. A lot of the things there have soured. It was starting to look like the Rays, that rather than having to pursue the split city plan, where they play half the year in St. Pete and half the year in Montreal, that they may be out of options, and that if they can't build a new stadium, and the city wants where Tropicana Field is right now, they want that land for another redevelopment. So there's a real expiry point on where they're going to be, and I can't see. They haven't been able to agree on building a team for building a stadium for the Rays on a full-time basis. They're not going to devote all that money to build a new building for the club on a part-time basis, and so they really looked like there was some momentum there. And Stephen Bronfman and his group have done a tremendous job building the case quietly for Montreal, making all the connections that are necessary, putting every piece in place. And I thought that this could be a real tipping point. Now, I mean, who knows? Like, everything now is just so up in the air. I don't know whether this pauses some of that progress, this pauses some of that momentum. I think baseball will be a bit more reluctant for anything that's too much of a shock to the system right now. And I wonder, 2-3 years from now, are you looking at, which region has recovered best from the pandemic? Is the St. Pete area, St. Pete Tampa area, mired in recession? Is Montreal booming? Vice versa. It may come down to something like that at this point. So I think where we are right now is just, everything is more unknown. I would have put the odds much higher before the pandemic, and right now I just really don't know. I don't think anybody does.
I think we'll also have to see what the political landscape looks like in the States, given everything happening.
I mean, that's a whole other episode.
Different conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I mean, like it's frightening. It's there, but will there be a political appetite for them to take a team from the United States and move it to Canada? I think that could be a very real thing down the road too, depending how things play out.
I'll add one more question to that, because you brought up Florida, and that's one of the scenes for Return to Baseball. They're thinking of scheduling a lot of the games in Florida and in Arizona. It's the home of spring training. It's the Grapefruit League. How come Florida has not been a hotbed for baseball? The Marlins aren't doing well. The Rays aren't doing well. What's happening down there?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I don't know I know from a distance about the Marlins situation, but from my visits there, Marlins Park, it's not in a great spot. And I think one thing that you need to do with
Little
your
Havana.
Marlins, it's just hard to get to. There's not a lot of parking. There's a lot of traffic. If you're trying to get in and out from the game, it's inconvenient. You're trying to get from downtown Miami from your work to the ballpark. It's tough. And I just think that that's not convenient for fans, and it's challenging. And then you think about the history of the team. They built them up. They've been stripped down. They've been run as bare bones. They've taken taxpayer money when they've been, for completely profitable and not giving fans a good product. There's ample reason to be pissed at the Marlins. The Rays, I think, to a large extent, are a geography problem too. Like, they're in St. Pete. Most of your crowd is in Tampa, and it's really hard to get from Tampa to St. Pete after work. Like, you've got a couple bridges; they are just rammed with traffic, and you could spend an hour and a half to 2 hours trying to get there, and you're just going to be frustrated. And a lot of people don't want to do that, right? Like, the hockey arena in Tampa is right there downtown. You're walking from your office building. There's tons of room to park. You can get in and out. It's convenient, right? It's a really smart setup. And nothing about the Trop is a smart setup. Plus, it's a dump. But you've got an amazing team. The club does a great job engaging people. I really love a lot of the in-game stuff that they do. I think they're super creative. They're super smart. They're fun. They've got a lot of things going for it. And the fact that they aren't able to generate better attendance is something systematic. And it's nothing to do with the team. Like, the team is doing everything in its power. And at that point, you're saying, okay, well, either the geography is not working or the region just doesn't care. And I think it's probably a lot of door number one. But there's a part of me that wonders, okay, if the Ybor City plan would have worked out, like, would people have gone in droves to Ybor? I don't know. And so I think that, you put all those factors together, you got a lot of things working against both clubs that make it tough for them to succeed.
So every Rays fan watching right now just heard your endorsement for DJ Kitty as the team mascot.
Oh man, I don't have any of my DJ Kitty memorabilia here, but I love DJ Kitty. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I actually think, like, it's actually really one of the things they do in game, which is a lot of fun. Is like, it's ridiculous. But me and one of my colleagues, every time we're there and we see DJ Kitty, we just stop and stare at the screen and enjoy it. Maybe it's because we're patently immature or whatever, but it's a lot of fun. It's really well done.
So thank you so much for your time. Before we let you go, do you have any final thoughts to share with us?
I'm hoping that we'll all have sports soon. I'm hoping that we can all continue to be smart and do our part in physical distancing, and not because some of the limitations are being removed, start acting as if we're bulletproof or we're through this, because we're certainly not. But I think we all need to do our part so we can have more normalcy in our lives, and hopefully we'll have some sports soon to watch. And we're seeing the Stanley Cup Finals. We're seeing hopefully the Raptors make another run at repeating as NBA champions, and we're watching some baseball as we play towards a 2020 World Series.
Awesome. Shi, you've done well for yourself as a former Jerusalem Post intern.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's that's a lifetime ago, and back when I wasn't in the toy department, and it's a lot more fun in the toy department.
Shi, Dylan, thank you so much for your time tonight, and everyone, we'll see you next Tuesday when we have Kevin Abrams, the Assistant General Manager of the New York Giants, joining us.